Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and at long last I was finally able to make Aegislash work in the Open Grade League. Now several things have happened to make Aegislash now a viable Pokemon, and I do want to talk about it. The first of which is over the past few seasons, Aegislash did receive several buffs. Gyro Ball and Shadow Ball both getting buffed means that Aegislash can now double up with either one of its charge stacks as they are both 50 energy. Also, nerfs to Pokemon like Shadow Scizor and the Mud Slappers do definitely contribute to Aegislash being more viable. Aegislash is an extremely skill-intensive Pokemon. It's difficult to use, but there's been a team structure that's been discovered that has actually let Aegislash be very, very successful. You want to be pairing up Aegislash with a bulky tank that has a good matchup into Voltage Fortress, something like an Umbreon or a Clodsire. And then, for your final Pokemon, you need a Shield Pressure Mon. We're talking Shadow Charizard, Shadow Primeape, Shadow Feraligatr, something that you can send in on the safe switch and really pressure shields away from your opponent. Because ideally, Aegislash wants to be set up in the 0 shield scenario or in the 1-0s at the absolute best case. So having a bulky Pokemon that can deal with Voltage Fortress, which is a very big problem for Aegislash, that can really kind of set up the Shield Pressure Mon to get shields down, and then Aegislash is just an absolute nightmare when your opponent has no Protect Shields to protect itself from the deadly Shadow Balls and Gyro Balls that it launches when it moves into its Blade form. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and in game number 1, we are off to a disastrous start leading Umbreon into Wigglytuff. I have 2 answers to Charm in the back, so I save switch into Shadow Charizard, and my opponent is going to stay in with a Wigglytuff and fire off the Swift. This is a very safe shield for me, because I know I can always get shields back. My opponent sends in what I thought was going to be a Quagsire, but they send in possibly the most washed Pokemon in the entire Grade League. They send out Gastrodon. Something that I did notice was a lot of trainers were trying to run Wigglytuff plus Mudslap teams, and they just really do not work anymore. Here with Charizard, I just beat their entire team with this one Pokemon alone. I shield up the Body Slam. I did get the boost on the first Air Cutter, so I go down 2 shields, but I know that I can always get the shields back. And as long as I can get shields down, Aegislash is just going to win me this game. Air Cutter bait is going to get the shield. Now I'm going for another Air Cutter, and this is a boosted Air Cutter. It's going to do the vast majority of their HP, so my opponent is forced to put up a shield. Now I can bring in Umbreon. Unfortunately, I do get 1 turn bring in, so I don't get my Snarl Sneak, which is pretty catastrophic. They go for the Rock Slide, which does do slightly more damage. I just have to watch for a catch attempt. They go for it, and at this point, this game is over. Because I can just send in the Aegislash, farm up to the back-to-back charge stacks, and there's nothing that my opponent can do. Aegislash, when it's in its shield form, uses a modified version of Psycho Cut, which is called Charging. Charging does 1 damage and generates 6 energy per charging. However, the good news is even though charging is pretty terrible, you're so bulky with Aegislash that you can just tank hit after hit, farm up to the back-to-back charge stacks, and then there's just no path forward for my opponent. So I fire off the Gyro Ball, that takes the 1-hit knockout, and back in comes the Marowak. I am double debuffed from 2 Icy Winds, but this is Blade form Aegislash. We take the knockout and take the win. We move to game number 2, picking up a very nice lead, Umbreon into Fortress. Since the Fortress are now defaulting to Volt Switch, this actually means that Umbreon has a very strong matchup. This is because Fortress, it's very much reliant on debuffs and non-same type attack bonus moves, and that just doesn't really work against the Pokemon that has the bulk of Umbreon. So Umbreon has a very comfortable 0 shield win, and by neutralizing Volt Switch Fortress, I know that my 2 Pokemon in the back are suddenly going to be a lot safer. So they fire off Rock Tomb, I'm returning fire with the Foul Play, and another nice thing about this matchup is the Umbreon is it's very awkward for the Fortress to try and throw on good charge stack timing. My opponent was able to throw on good charge stack timing on their second charge stack, but they weren't able to on their first, and now I can just make the back-to-back Foul Plays, take the knockout, and I still have about 30% of my Umbreon remaining. I am heavily debuffed on the Umbreon, so I'm just going to look to pivot into the Shadow Charizard no matter what they send in. And what they send in is a Bullet Seed Credilli. I'm always going to have to give up shields, but Shadow Charizard is so oppressive that even debuffed, I should be able to get shields back. My opponent reveals their final Pokemon is a Jellicent, and I'm so happy that I saved my Umbreon. Here, I do make a slight misplay. I should have gone for the Air Cutter into the Blast Burn in case I did get the Air Cutter boost. My opponent doesn't have to shield either, but I know that Aegislash really wants shields down. So I'm just going to be double shielding the Charizard. Now I can try and CMP tie them, and if they want to keep the Jellicent around, they're going to have to double shield. My opponent wisely does not fall for my attempt at a CMP tie. Air Cutter will be shielded. I get the boost, they wait the turn, so I do land the Wing Attack, and Surf is going to knock out the Charizard. I'm going to send in Umbreon and just look to Snarl down. They should bank a charge stack and pivot, and the moment they do, it's Aegislash time. This is the worst meta matchup for Cradily. There is just nothing it can do. They can apply debuff after debuff, but they just can't ever damage the Aegislash. They fire off Rock Tomb number 1, immediately followed by Rock Tomb number 2. I'm actually going to throw my Gyro Ball just a little bit early because when I switch to the Blade form, I will have better energy generation because instead of charging, I will get to use Psycho Cut. This will incentivize my opponent at some point to try and go for the combination play. I'm able to land the Gyro Ball, there's the combination play, but now this is just going to set up the Umbreon perfectly. Umbreon should be 2 off a move, so I can farm down, exit with the back-to-back, and my opponent is still 2 bullet seeds away from the game-winning Rock Tomb. So Umbreon, foul play, gets the first shield, but we have more where that came from. Foul play number 2 knocks out Cradily. These Aegislash matchups do take a while, but we get the win as the match timer counts down to 0. We got up a great lead in the next match, Umbreon into Shadow Malamar. Even though Shadow Malamar can hit for super effective damage with superpower, Umbreon very comfortably tanks that, and they have no fast move pressure. They land superpower, they're going to be farming up, trying for a catch onto Corviknight, and I will respond with the Shadow Charizard. Shadow Charizard makes the Blast Burn, and I'm never going to be baiting. I just need to guarantee the knockout or shield advantage. They call the bait, and Corviknight gets erased. In the back is Carbink. Carbink gets a full reverse farm, but I don't think the Carbink's gonna like what happens next because I get to reveal my final Pokemon is Aegislash. There's nothing Carbink can do. Everything is resisted. Carbink is forced to fire off a resisted Moonblast just to burn the switch timer. Moonblast does nothing. In comes Malamar, and back in comes the Umbreon. I saved all the energy from earlier in the match for this exact reason. Now, I can go for foul play, after foul play, after foul play. My opponent's going to be forced to debuff themselves and throw a superpower if they want to take the knockout. So, after I make a third foul play, I'm always just going to be no-shielding the Umbreon, because I know that Aegislash up 2 shields simply cannot lose. So, we're going to let the Umbreon go. My opponent ends up baiting with a foul play, and that is even better. I'm able to make the foul play. They catch back onto the Carbink, but unfortunately, they have just switch-locked a Pokemon that can't damage Aegislash. So, I just send in the Aegislash. I get to farm up to the back-to-back Gyro Balls. Opponent sees the writing on the wall and concedes the match. We get up a great lead in the next match. Umbreon into Volt Switch Fortress once again. And Umbreon being able to throw after 5 Snarls and it being perfect charge stack timing, barely outpacing the Rock Tomb is just so nice. Whereas the Fortress is forced to throw on really rough timing because if they don't, then I can just get a second foul play and then they're pretty low on HP. I think in a bit of a surprising way, I think Umbreon is quite underrated in this current meta. Umbreon is one of the strongest counters to Aegislash because Umbreon can actually survive 2 Blade Form Gyro Balls, which almost nothing can do because Umbreon is just so monstrously bulky. In addition, Umbreon has a winning matchup in a Volt Switch Fortress. It beats Shadow Quagsire as well. And here, I can't quite take the knockout, so I snipe with the Shadow Charizard. My opponent's going to reveal Quagsire, and I'm not baiting. I'm just going straight for the Blast Burn. Blast Burn may be resisted, but it's sure not going to feel like it. Blast Burn connects, Quagsire gets rocked, and now I can just shield and wing attack down. My opponent will be forced to pivot out, and they reveal their final Pokemon is Altaria. These wing attacks do so much damage to Altaria. I can threaten devastating damage with Blast Burn. Blast Burn is resisted, but my opponent is forced to give up a shield. And you better believe I'm shielding the Charizard, because I know if I get shields down, there is just nothing stopping the Aegislash. So I shield, I fire off the Blast Burn. This Blast Burn will do so much damage to the Altaria. Altaria puts up the shield, and the game is over. In comes Aegislash. They pivot into Quagsire, but Quagsire can't really do any damage. I'm just going to charging down the Quagsire, Shadow Ball this Altaria. Opponent sees the writing on the wall and concedes the match. We move to the next match, and we see a very familiar lead, Umbreon into Wigglytuff. Same game plan as before, safe switch into the Shadow Charizard, this time answered with a Charge-a-Bug. Charge-a-Bug is a core breaker for this team. The version of the team that runs the Clodsire and the Shadow Feraligatr would obviously do a lot better here. And now I just have to hope that my opponent doesn't know how to count, because I didn't make the Blast Burn, and it turns out they don't know how to count. I'm able to get the final shield, and just like that, I'm now in a very good position. I've got a 2-0 shield advantage, and that is all Aegislash has ever wanted. Umbreon is so bulky that it can survive 2 super effective X-Scissors. I do think it's probably worth giving up 1 Protect Shield just to ensure that I can knock out the Charge-a-Bug, and then I'm just going to have 1-0 shield Aegislash in the endgame. My opponent will fire off energy, I'm putting up the shield, and I'm going to be throwing 1 Snarl and the Foul Play to secure the KO. My opponent pivots into a Gastrodon. How is this the second Gastrodon that I've seen? People are really still trying to run the Mud Slappers, and I'm here to say the Mud Slappers are pretty spectacularly terrible. Gastrodon farms up a ton of energy, but I can survive a Water Pulse very comfortably. I'm very bulky. My opponent's on Earth Power, and guess what? That's still not going to matter. This can only be a Body Slam. That's double resisted. I can very comfortably survive that. That does nothing, and now I will fire off the Shadow Ball on alignment. This Shadow Ball is going to be knocking out the Gastrodon. I do switch into Blade form, however, which means I'm going to be very, very glassy. My opponent, they can look to send in the Charge-a-Bug. If they do, I'm going to switch into the Umbreon and combo play with the Foul Play. That's going to be knocking out the Charge-a-Bug, and importantly, it resets the Aegislash back to shield form. That means that I'm now very bulky. I can withstand the charms, make it to the Gyro Ball, and it's good night, Wigglytuff. Look at that, the research already updates Gyro Ball, taking the one-hit knockout, down goes Wigglytuff, and that's a good game. We see a familiar lead in the next match, Umbreon into Shadow Malamar. We saw how this played out before. It's pretty nice for the Umbreon. I feel very comfortable letting the Umbreon absorb Superpower because the Malamar is almost always going to have to pivot out. However, this is a problem. They save switch Shadow Quagsire, and unfortunately, Shadow Quagsire is very strong into my backline. Umbreon is my best answer, but my Umbreon already took big damage from Superpower. So I may just have to stay in here with the Umbreon and try and play this out. The good news for me is that I'm able to get a lot of damage onto the Quagsire, but the Quagsire has not yet thrown any energy. They go for the Stone Edge, I send in the Charizard, and at the very least I will be able to get a 3 Wing Attack head start before they bring back in the Malamar. In comes Malamar, I farm up to the Blast Burn, and I will bait with the Air Cutter, hoping to try and get a shield from my opponent. I fire off the Air Cutter, Malamar does not buy it, they do not put up the shield, but I get an Air Cutter boost. I'm down 0 shields to 2, however, I have a boosted Charizard. If there was ever a Pokemon that could get shields back from an opponent, it's a boosted Shadow Charizard with a Blast Burn loaded. They reveal their final Pokemon is a Corviknight, and I farm up to an Air Cutter plus Blast Burn. Air Cutter gets the shield. Now I can double bait because I do not want my opponent to get a big overfarm here. I want to pressure them into throwing. I throw 2 more Wing Attacks. Unfortunately, they will cut me off and deny my energy as they fire off the Air Cutter, but I've got the 0 shields, which is exactly where I want the Aegislash. In comes Aegislash. This is a +1 Corviknight. They are attack boosted, and look at how comfortably I survived this payback. I still tanked that very well. Now I just fire off the Shadow Ball. I figured they'd try and predict an overfarm, but I just go for the Shadow Ball right away. Shadow Ball is going to inflict deadly damage onto the Corviknight. They send in the Quagsire. I pivot into the Umbreon, and Umbreon is able to hang on and make the last second Foul Play. Foul Play will secure the knockout. Back in comes Corviknight. It's going to be a race Snarl versus Sand Attack. We snarl down that Corviknight on 1 HP and take the win. Picking up a terrible lead in the next match, Umbreon into Alolan Ninetales. I save switch into Shadow Charizard, and my opponent is going to respond with a Shadow Quagsire. This is not a great spot to be in. However, I know that if I can land a Blast Burn, I can always win Switch Advantage, and winning Switch Advantage should put me in a pretty good spot, because then the Aegislash is going to be aligned onto the Alolan Ninetales. I will have to go down both shields. I'm hoping that my opponent will send in their third here, but it's highly likely that they're just going to do what they do, which is send in the Ninetales. Ninetales is going to have to give up at least 1 shield back because Blast Burn would take the 1-hit knockout. They will put up the shield, knock out the Charizard, and I'm going to have to hope that Umbreon down a shield beats whatever they have in the back. In comes Aegislash in the back. They have Guzzlord, and that is not what I was hoping to see. However, I'm not out of it yet. Umbreon is so insanely bulky, and Sludge Bomb does not get same type attack bonus on Guzzlord. So even though my fast moves are resisted, Umbreon could actually put up a pretty solid fight here, even being down a shield. Guzzlord will launch Sludge Bomb after Sludge Bomb, but Umbreon is just so mercilessly tanky. Guzzlord will be winning charge attack priority over the Umbreon, but I'm not in any danger of getting knocked out. However, if my opponent is good with their energy management, then I could be in quite a lot of trouble. Last Resort is going to be getting them very low. I fire off the Foul Play, and my opponent does not go for the CMP tie. My opponent knows that the most valuable thing that they could have in this moment is energy on the Guzzlord, so they overfarm CMP tie to my second Foul Play. I'm going to get knocked out with the Brutal Swing, and I'm going to have a nightmare of a time trying to get rid of this Guzzlord. Almost all of Guzzlord's bulk comes from its HP stat, and charging only does 1 damage per charging, which means I'm never going to be able to farm it down. Instead, I'm just going to have to try and absorb Brutal Swing after Brutal Swing after Brutal Swing and try and manage my energy well enough so that way I'll be able to outpace the Ninetales when they bring it back in. Guzzlord is going to connect with a third Brutal Swing. That puts me very, very low. I farm up as much as I dare, and the game comes down to this. If I can survive 2 Powder Snows at my low HP in Blade form, I'll reach the Gyro Ball and win the game. It's going to be close. In comes Ninetales, the second Powder Snow KOs. So close, but we do lose that game. Hopping into the final match, we pick up a very strong lead, Umbreon into Furret. The fact that my opponent is staying in does worry me, because Furret can learn Brick Break. If they run Brick Break, I imagine this matchup gets a lot closer, but to my surprise, they are not on Brick Break. If they're staying in on Trailblaze, then something in the back is terribly, terribly weak to the Umbreon. And I'm very okay with this, because Umbreon has a dominant winning matchup over the Furret. Furret's going to fire off a boosted Swift, and Umbreon just simply does not care. Snarl is a very bad fast move. It does basically no damage, but what it does do is generate energy kind of quickly. So Umbreon is able to spam out these foul plays and take advantage of the fact that it has insane bulk. Foul play forces the shield. I'm just going to fire off the next foul play on alignment, because if my opponent doesn't CMP time me, which they do not, they're going to have to get knocked out or give me their final shield. Now I have a Shadow Charizard, which is up 2 shields. So at this point, the game is probably over. I also have an Aegislash that's up 2 shields. I'm going to go for the nastiest farm down you have ever seen. I'm sending an Aegislash, and I'm going for the charging down. I am a complete wall to Furret's energy. There's not really anything it can do here. They can fire off Trailblaze after Trailblaze, boosting up their Sucker Punches, but Aegislash is bulky enough that I just simply do not care. I did lose quite a lot of HP on the Aegislash, but I exit with a Charge Attack loaded. In comes Wigglytuff, and well, they're not going to have a Wigglytuff anymore, as this is going to be a clean one-hit knockout. I want to reset back to the shield form, so I'm going to immediately pivot into the Charizard. That takes the one-hit knockout. In the back is Shadow Dusknoir. Opponent sees the writing on the wall and concedes the match. All in all, I'm very happy and pretty pleasantly surprised that Aegislash is actually now a usable Pokemon. And I think other trainers are catching on to it as well. I saw a ton of Aegislash today as I was battling in the 2700s. A lot of trainers are testing it out, and it seems like a lot of trainers are having some pretty solid results with it. I do feel that Aegislash can be at times a pretty skill-intensive Pokemon. The strategy to set it up seems pretty simple, just get shields down and then Aegislash can sweep, but there can be a lot of complicated endgames in which knowing when to throw your charge attack and when to use your Protect Shield can actually be very important, because you want to try and absorb as much damage as possible in the shield form, but there's some scenarios where you have to take advantage of the fact that you have faster pacing in the Blade form, so throwing a little bit early and then letting the Psycho Cuts that generate 9 energy instead of the 6 from charging allow you to outpace. So I do think there can be some complicated endgames with Aegislash, but I do think that this is the best meta environment for it that we've ever seen. Aegislash, now that it can double up on charge attacks, that helps it quite a bit, and the fact that Mud Slap is a lot less common, Pokemon like Scizor are gone, because Scizor was a huge issue for Aegislash, is overall just a really big buff to this Pokemon. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching today's video, please do help support the channel by leaving a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you have not. And an extra special thank you as always to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide to the channel is so sincerely appreciated. So thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.